Then a good, in-depth panel discussion about effectiveness and outcomes. Let's dive straight in. Kate, why is there so much focus on outcomes, effectiveness, attribution? Haven't we proven that TV works already?
Well, I would say we have, except that not enough people are, I guess, using that evidence. And I think also, you know, there's a huge change. We all know this, right? So if you look at the this year, next year stats, whatever it is, 81.5% of all ad pounds in the UK go to the essentially kind of digital pure play. And that's because everybody's got very excited by the amount of outcome data that those kinds of buys can generate. So I think TV has to get into the outcome game. We have to do a much better job of really, I think, proving the case and not assuming that just because TV is a phenomenal advertising product that everybody will recognise that. So I think that's why we've got to get into that world. But I think there's another really interesting, I guess, outcome, if you like, of the way in which TV works. So TV has always been a brilliant multiplier medium. It's kind of the original and the best, to coin an advertising phrase. And therefore, because of the impact it has on other channels, as the media ecosystem becomes more sophisticated, more fragmented, more complicated, I would argue that actually TV's multiplier magic is kind of increasing, and we have to go looking for it. So I think there's a real onus on everybody in this industry to look for what I would call the footprints of TV effectiveness, and there are some brilliant new things that we might come on and sort of talk about, but I think it's just becoming a more sophisticated, more complex world, and therefore we have to work harder to kind of really demonstrate the power of TV.
And I thought briefly, the study that ITV did looking at the value of TV as a way of bringing down search keyword costs was a brilliant example of that.
Yeah, so the three that I kind of always talk about are, you know, the three new things I think that we found are new evidence of how TV really changes the algorithm when you're basically buying a search campaign. So actually, if you get deep into the kind of weeds of that stuff, you can see the impact of TV in ways we've never measured before. We can also see that TV drives content consumption online. So actually, if you take the bid stream data from the internet and look at essentially what people are looking at, what people are reading, you get performance spikes, a little bit like you would see if you're looking at web traffic. But actually, that's, you know, total content across the internet. And then the third thing that we've been doing is looking at the impact of TV on price elasticity. And actually what we've been able to show is that TV is having a short-term effect on brands' price elasticity in a kind of very positive way, which to our knowledge is not something that's ever been measured before. So there's like loads of lovely new things to go out and look for, all of which I think support the case that TV remains, I would say this, wouldn't I, but the most effective advertising medium on the planet.
It's fascinating stuff. Okay, so Dan, you sit on the buy side. Yeah. Do the sellers genuinely need to keep doing work to demonstrate that TV works? Or actually has that case been proven to you and your clients?
I do absolutely want to see continued evolving proof that TV is continuing to work in the way that, all the ways that Kate's just said. I think, kind of taking a macro look, I think it's vital for the health of our entire media ecosystem that the symbiotic relationship that we've seen for decades, nearly a century, between advertisers and quality, culturally resonant TV content is maintained. I think, and to do that, we've got to continually prove in an ever-evolving media landscape that TV is still such a powerful advertising force. And I think over the last 10 years, I was actually around when I was working on Netflix when they launched their first original, the House of Cards. And for 10 years, there's kind of been this shift towards SVOD platforms and lots of those cultural moments not being advertising accessible. And it's been a challenge for brands because suddenly there are fewer and fewer of those opportunities. But we're actually seeing, so I'm excited to see more ways of getting back in. But at the same time, we have to demonstrate why that's important and be able to continually prove it. So I am keen to see measurement opportunities that prove that over and over again. Because
quick question, is one of the reasons why it's still important because agencies are full of young people who think that everyone spends their whole time streaming, not watching TV. But the wonderful Matt Hill at ThinkBox, soon to be at Sky, did an amazing study which just looked at media agency executives' perceptions of the TV market. And what he found was a kind of systematic bias, that they consistently overstate digital and they understate TV. Do you see evidence of that, which is one reason why we have to keep making the case?
Absolutely. It's media agencies, but it's client side as well. I think we're all quite, although we say we don't do it, we're quite bad at judging the world through the lens that that we experience it through. So, people and also people aren't very good at remembering their own behaviors. I've seen this for decades. I remember, I'm going to go back, show my age, but I remember when Sky Plus first came out. So, having a PVR, everyone said, I never watch live TV anymore. And I remember then the box would say, I disagree. You watch loads of live TV. And so people's perceptions of what they do are one lens that kind of filter your view of the world. And that's wrong anyway, because you're not the target audience. But also they're often wrong about what they actually do. So yes, clients, young media execs, older people, I know loads of people say, I never watch linear TV. And I'm almost certain that if you were able to look at their box, it would say that they do.
100%. Okay, Alex, you work in a huge global digital technology company, Magnite. Does data, connectivity, ad serving create new opportunities to prove out TV's effectiveness?
Yes, it definitely does. But also, you just talked about the evolution of what is linear TV, and now we've obviously have, we've got BVOD, we've got AVOD, we've got SVOD, we've got FAST, we've got, TV OEMs and everyone. So it's great, but it's also created a lot of fragmentation. And so part of what our partnerships team is trying to do is how do we connect that? What is the better way to connect that? How do we, look at different ID solutions and measurement tools? Because at the end of the day, we still need to prove something to the client in their campaigns. And at the very beginning, it was always, what was the incremental reach? How do I know I'm not targeting the same person on linear when I'm running a CTV campaign? So we've gone there, and obviously we have ongoing measurement tools and solutions that we're able to offer out, whether it's brand uplift, incremental reach constantly, as well as attribution and all. So it does make it more of a digital friendly, so to speak, but there's a lot of fragmentation that I think we're all just trying to work to solve for.
And quick question, obviously you're a business fundamentally built around ad serving. Does ad serving and data create new opportunities specifically? Are you now looking to link specifically exposures to outcomes and deliver attribution solutions in that way?
So we only have one part of our business that is very ad serving focused, which is our video ad server, SpringServe. So I mean, yes, so probably our tools being built to be able to prove to that, but we're not as omni-channel from that perspective when it comes to that advertising. But because we do have the SSP across omni-channel, so display, video, audio, CTV, and out of home, we do try to find those links for sure.
Cool, okay. Will, another big technology business. Tell us a bit about what you're doing in that attribution space, effectiveness space.
Yeah, we got the programmatic guys at the end here. But yeah, we're a DSP. We work with multiple clients across Europe and globally. I think right now, it's a really exciting time in the industry. We've got tons of clients already buying TV in a really successful way. And I think now there's a whole swathe of new clients coming to companies like us and saying, look, we buy a lot on TV, linear TV. We want to test some of these new channels. So we're trying to find different ways to assist them in measurement and give them the right tools to do that. Obviously working very closely with the clients, but also with the supply side. And I think we have clients that are very, heavy spenders on linear coming to us and trying to activate similar metrics on CTV. And I think right now there is enough to do that. So we work with one of the largest telecom client globally. I think they had about 8 or 9 different countries where they're running CTV campaigns. And across all that, it's probably about 80% of those campaigns they're measuring, some form of measurement. And I think some of that measurement is rooted in programmatic, like we talked about with ad server data. Some of that is, buying audiences that might have come from more traditional TV. And then finally, you've got that area which is maybe programmatic type solutions like incremental reach and attribution. So I think it's a really exciting time, and we have to keep challenging each other and pushing the boundaries.
Cool, okay. Kate, it won't have escaped anyone's attention that over the last 15 plus years, TV became a much more diverse medium. You've now got streaming formats, addressable formats. You've obviously got a suite of linear channels with slightly different audience profiles, different content. You've got shoppable formats, a whole bunch of different stuff. Do you have to do a different effectiveness suite for each of those? Or do you think about it as one big holistic whole?
It's a really good question. I think I think so. There's a fantastic writer who's a medic called Ben Goldacre, and his mantra, which has become my mantra, is generally, I think you'll find it's a bit more complicated than that, which is my answer to pretty much anybody who says, "Oh, I found the sort of the silver bullet for measuring this thing or that thing." I think all of these different ways, all of these different sort of formats of TV have nuances within them, which you have to take into account. But fundamentally, I think one of the biggest issues that we have is we worry so much about sometimes measuring stuff, we forget actually that the end game is effectiveness.
Right.
So you have to understand how all of these different things work, how they interact with every other channel that you're using. And I think there is often a bit of sort of product bias in this, which is that we sort of like to think that somehow this thing is so brilliant and different that it must be working in a fundamentally different way. And we see this actually with advertisers as well, right? So all advertisers believe that their brand is special and that somehow advertising works differently for them. Spoiler alert, actually, guess what? One brand of yellow fat, quite similar to another. One car brand, probably quite similar to another in the way it works.
What's that famous stat about parents? 72% of parents think their children are above average.
And I think it is arguably exactly. And in fact, there's a brilliant bit of neuroscience that does this for founders of brands, where they treat their brand like their children. So I think there's a bit of bias like that on our side of the fence as well, which is we think that we are inventing radically new ways in which advertising works. But actually, I would argue we have to get back to the basics of essentially doing the hard work of understanding how advertising works more generally, and then saying what is our model for how advertising works and how do these different products fit into that. And I can guarantee there will be no one solution that works precisely for each one. You're going to need a mix of a little bit of attribution, maybe. I think people use too much attribution, probably. A bit of an econometrics, if you can do it. And then some good old-fashioned techniques, vintage techniques, as I was sort of talking about yesterday. Things like geo-experiments, what used to be known as a regional test, but brought right up to date for the digital world. So if you do experiments, if you have attribution, if you have econometrics, put all of those together, you can probably create some version of the truth.
Is it fair to say that the most powerful tool in your armour is probably mass live linear audiences, and that the sort of power of that cultural moment of simultaneous viewing, everything we talk about, versus, say, the long tail of streaming, where you're just one streaming provider in many, many different channels, is...
I think it's still, so there is definitely something magical about those live simultaneous viewed moments, right? Because you get the power of lots of people in a room, you get the kind of cultural impact of people watching the same thing at the same time. I think in a digital streaming world, there's a slightly different interpretation of mass simultaneous reach, which is lots of people watching stuff at the same time. They might be watching different things. And I think one of the really interesting questions is, how does that change effectiveness? So what is the power of the simultaneous content bit as opposed to the simultaneity of time? But yes, I think, there is something wonderful about that moment. And I think, one of my favourite pushbacks on people who get obsessed about wastage is, today's wastage is tomorrow's customer, right? So actually what people like to think about in terms of linear's wastage is really, the people who are going to be buying your product in the future. And if you look at what has powered, some of the most famous brands of today, it is essentially that wastage bit, which is also known as free reach.
Sorry.
I was just going to jump in on to the question around big cultural moments being the single most important thing. I think they probably are, but I think if we measure the wrong thing around them, we won't be able to identify that in what we're measuring. If you're measuring for short-term sales outcomes, and we're able to start attributing it based on, okay, well, that household saw that moment and sales happened as a result, it may well be that those big cultural moments don't have the link that we would expect them to, we would hope that they might have, because actually they're long-term effects. And so what I worry about is by measuring the wrong things, or, putting too much importance on something just because we can measure it, we end up losing those TV properties that are so powerful, they're so useful, the way that they are things you can't build a brand without those associations. But yet it'd be quite easy to see a world where we just have highly efficient, made for advertising type content that's measurable but not powerful.
And I think and if we do that, we end up in a world where actually we shoot the golden goose in the foot, right? Which is, because we've got this extraordinarily powerful advertising product, And if we only ever measure those kind of short-term things, then actually you just end up, I think, possibly destroying the effectiveness that we've all taken for granted for so long.
Yeah.
But does it, sorry, John, does it come back to what the client actually wants to measure? And quite often, if they're running branding on TV, which is fantastic and works, really well, they're also coming to us, for instance, and saying, we also want to run studies that can tell us attribution or how many people have gone to a website after seeing the ad on CTV. So I think we do have to listen to the client and work out solutions, sometimes client by client, which is tricky. So we probably need more standardization. But quite often it comes back to simply what the client wants.
I would say what they want to achieve, not just what they want to measure.
Yeah, that's probably what I should have said. That's what I was trying to say. That's what I was trying to say.
I was going to ask you, do you think there's a risk in this new world of data-driven connected TV that we fall into a kind of last-click attribution problem, that just because we can measure some part of the overall campaign, we attribute more value to that because we can link that exposure to an outcome?
Well, you had a great phrase on this, didn't you? That essentially, we worry.
Not everything that counts can be counted, and everything that can be counted counts, or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Alex, what's your take?
I think TV is great, but we all know that. And I think we had a beautiful utopian goal for data-driven TV, which is, we can hyper-target. And I think that's where we kind of had a pitfall of, which was going, we want to do exactly what we've done in digital, which is not the case. So I think it's a lot of learning that we've had to do over the years, and obviously working with the client side, but also our DSP partners. I think it's always evolutionally changing, and it does have its pitfalls, but it also has opportunities, whether we're looking at, it may not always be the most desirable, but we look at IPs and we can, utilize different partners to be able to measure to that. So whether it's an Experian for that offline piece, or you're looking at retail media and how we can bring that in, there is going to be benefits with it. But I think across Europe, we've got privacy issues that we need to be respectful of. So I think we will eventually get there. I think we dived in too hard about what we really wanted, because we saw this worked amazing in digital, but now we've had to take a step back and look at, okay, so what are we doing? We're doing genre targeting, we're doing contextual targeting. So it has its benefits, and it will come into this fruition of the beautiful dream that we all have for it.
So next question. I guess the other big change in TV is that, from a consumer point of view, we now have access to the most extraordinary array of content. So if you go into a typical smart TV app store, you'll find often hundreds of apps. And that creates some problems. Does all of that TV, it's all viewed on a screen in the living room by the same people, does it all behave in the same way? In other words, does advertising against a high-end premium first-run drama, stacked and watching the whole thing, versus, say, a long tail, carousel of YouTube content, which is something you can do now, does it all act in the same way, or is there still some value with the high-end premium quality stuff, something unique?
I think we're going to do an experiment on this next year, actually. So one of the things I really want to do is run an experiment where we look at the same ad run against the same content, but delivered in different ways. Right. So actually, is there virtue in watching the same ad against content on ITVX versus the same ad against the same content on YouTube? And I think there is. And I think the reason for that is because of the very long history that TV advertising has of being in a channel which has what I would call meaningful friction in place. So we make it deliberately hard for advertisers to say anything they want to say without having it pre-cleared and pre-checked by Clearcast in broadcast. And what that does is create extraordinary trust in TV advertising. Now, I was overhearing a conversation yesterday where the point of view is put forward that actually that's a bit difficult, it's a bit slow, it's a bit of a pain to get it through. You have to pay the agency to do it, or you have to get a load of people internally to do it. And therefore, it's much easier just to put stuff in places where it doesn't have to be pre-cleared. And that really worries me, because actually it's not just about the fact that as a broadcaster, we're funding Clearcast and we are putting that friction in place to protect consumers and to protect brands. But I think it's really short-sighted, because ultimately what that will do is kill the trust that people have in a medium, which will make it less effective.
That's interesting. I spoke to a DSP recently who said that they'd done a kind of back-of-an-envelope analysis, and they thought that only about 50% of the video ads they saw had been Clearcast approved, i.e. 50% were never intended for broadcast. They were purely digital video ads. Is that a problem?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
I think it's a problem, right? Because you can't, on the one hand, want to be part of a TV ecosystem, and then on the other hand, not play by the rules.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I think it comes down to how close you're working with those broadcasters, how open and honest the conversations are, how transparent they are. When we work with a broadcaster, we go through a very stringent certification process that can take, in some cases, a year. But I think it's so important because these are massive media businesses. Yeah. There's so many legal so many legal processes to go through that you have to do that first. And then when everyone's on the right page, then you can start running the right advertising.
But also you have to have that control. You need to have the tools for that control for the broadcaster. We want to make sure it's, it fills the process that every broadcaster wants and every streamer wants. But you also need to give them the tools to be able to manage that. So you can say they can only accept a creative, that's what they want. If that's what they want their accounts to be, that's important as well. So, because at the end of the day, the streamer, the FAST owner, whoever it is, they get to decide what they want to be on their channels or their content. But the controls and the tools need to be there as well. So I think it's a bit of both. Yeah.
Okay, Dan, I want to talk about where the data gaps are. So I was running a panel at another event a couple of weeks back, and we just did a quick question to the audience. How many of you think that marketers have the data they need to make accurate decisions about where and how to invest? In other words, do they have the data they need to power their econometric models? Yeah. And guess how many hands went up? Not one. So no one seems to think that marketers do have all the data they need. From your point of view at Starcom, what do you see as the problem?
I don't know if we have a data problem or even a proof problem. There are two different things. I think on the one hand, we have a belief problem. Yes. I think the data and the proof for all the things that we're talking about has been there for a long time. And yes, it needs to evolve, and yes, it needs to react to the changing media landscape. But I think a lot of the proof is there. The study, everyone's talked a lot this year about profitability too. Right. It's a really transparent piece of research. It's really powerful, and it's really clear, and it's honest. It's not trying to make too much of TV or whatever. But yet, you're not seeing as a result people go, okay, well, I must do X, Y, and Z. So I think we need to somehow address that. We need to address the belief issue. And I think possibly the data gap that we've got is less about what works, right, and more about why it works. So I think it's really interesting, some of the stuff you're talking about that you can measure on the back end. If we can start to extrapolate from, if you're able to identify that actually we've seen that advertising in X, Y, and Z environments has driven a brand uplift, because I know you do brand uplift as well, then we go, well, why has that worked? Back to your point around, do different platforms have a different effect on the advertising? We know, we've seen studies that go, high emotional content delivers stronger memory formation and stronger emotional outtake from the advertising that's around it. But the more that we can dig into the why those different bits are working for different categories, that then helps explain the what, and then hopefully that overcomes the belief gap. I think that's the real challenge.
I think the belief thing is so interesting. I don't know quite when advertising became a faith. Do you know what I mean? But it is weird. So I was listening to someone the other day who said, my boss doesn't believe in brand. And it's like, I'm not sure that branding should be a faith, right? Nobody builds a brand because it's a nice to have. People build brands because they create value for shareholders.
I feel like there's a Douglas Adams quote lurking in the background somewhere about faith and belief. But tell us, do we have the proof we need?
I think we do, but
what is the belief problem exactly?
I think what is it? It's a really good question. I think we almost have too much data in a world that's becoming increasingly sophisticated / complicated / fragmented, depending on your choice of language. And therefore, I think what we have really is an insight gap and a disagreement on what your version of the truth is going to be. Because everybody's going to have a slightly different version of the truth, depending on how you measure things, what your belief is, all of those sorts of things. So I think where it's difficult is trying to align multiple stakeholders around a single agreed version of the truth, which uses multiple data points. Everybody wants a simple answer. It isn't a simple answer because it's no longer a simple world. And I think that's where the problem lies.
I think there's also, to quote much older quote than Douglas Adams, and it's, something along the lines of, it's incredibly difficult to make someone understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And I think,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
And there are lots of people in our industry whose job and salary depends on them driving short-term results.
So are you suggesting the higher the salary, the less they have to understand?
Possibly, yeah.
Doesn't say much about the C-suite, does it? I mean,
I don't think it's that. It's just that there are lots of people in our industry whose job it is to drive short-term results because that's measurable, that's quantifiable, and at the end of the year, that's something you can point to that you've changed. Brand building takes longer. We know it takes longer, but we also know...
So it's the long-term versus short-term.
It's the long-term versus short-term.
Quarterly reporting cycle.
That, for me, is that's the thing that's always a challenge, because that has to... It's not a faith, you're right, but at the same time, you have to believe it's going to happen. You have to have faith in that future.
I sort of believe it, but I also think that the thing that people forget sometimes is that if we go back to talking about TV doesn't just work in the long term, right? So I was, when I was on the creative agency side, if you had a campaign that didn't quite shift the dial as much as you were crossing your fingers it was going to do, then you could sort of point to, well, just let it wear in, let it bed in, we'll look for a sort of longer term. But actually, when you had a campaign that worked, everything worked.
True.
Right, so you could see it shift. You could see it shift short-term sales. You could see it shift search. You could see it shift every metric.
So that age-old question
I think
about just rethinking brand and performance, and that odd dichotomy we sometimes pitch in.
Well, I think if it works, it all works. But I think what we have to do is get back to having, as I said, a kind of really good model for how do you think this campaign is going to work. So there was a brilliant strategist called Marilyn Baxter who ran a course for baby planners, which I did right at the beginning of my career. And she said, if you're trying to evaluate advertising, and this was like channel agnostic, start with a theory of how you think your advertising is going to work. So actually, if you think really hard about what is the model for how your campaign works, then you can say, okay, if that's how it's going to work, what effects would I expect to see? And if I know what effects I'm going to see, then I can work out how to measure them. And that's what you measure. And then if you put all of that together, you get a sense of, is it working in the round? And I think that's what we've lost a little bit, because we've become so obsessed with so many different specific individual measurement techniques that get us excited, because they offer those sort of silver bullets.
And that's kind of why I want to get to measuring the whys. So if you understand the
and
whys,
that helps you understand the whys.
then you can plan for those. So whether it's attention or engagement, or is it consecutive seconds of attention? I mean, what are the actual media metrics that are truly connected to those outcomes?
Okay, we have 3 minutes left, so we're heading into the quick fire question round. Will and Alex, quick question. Standardization. So do we need to see more standardization in the suite of tools that we're using to prove out effectiveness, to attribute value to our spend?
Oh, definitely. I definitely think we do it, because as I mentioned earlier, everything is so fragmented. And then when we look at the different inventory available, everyone wants to keep their own data, which makes absolute sense. So I think collaboration first, and making sure that everyone is on board to say, okay, we'll share a little bit. It's going to be, we'll have it, in a data cleaner, or whatever the method and process will be. But we need to have collaboration first, and then build the standardization that the people who are collaborating are happy with, so that as an industry, the buy side is happy with it, the sell side is happy with it. So yeah, we definitely need it, but I think collaboration first before we hit the standardization.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting to hear Mark from Foxtel yesterday talking about, I think he said, unbind the old ways, which I don't think we should, that's quite extreme. But I think we should look at collaboration around the new channels, the new streamers, and how that can dovetail with TV measurement. And just keep it simple. But I think let's try and standardize something that can mean reporting across these new, TV plus the newer channels.
Dan, Kate and her team, the UK broadcasters, have been doing amazing work to prove out TV's effectiveness. Is it going to genuinely make a difference to your spending and investment decisions?
I hope so. I hope so. We certainly are absolutely listening to the work that's been done, and we are constantly making a case for this kind of holistic understanding of how brand and performance all work together, so that we absolutely give those channels the budgets that they deserve. Because I genuinely believe, as I said at the beginning, the health of the media ecosystem demands it. Otherwise, we won't have something to work with in 10 years' time.
Right, final question, unfortunately, because we only have a minute left. The future. So during the next few years, where do you see scope for innovation in this space? There's a special prize for the person who says the smartest thing about AI. Will, do you have anything smart about AI, or indeed innovation,
I think
to say?
there will be AI added to platforms like ours, for instance, in the coming years. Yeah, that's all I can say about that at the moment.
Watch this space.
Yeah. I think innovative formats and being able to scale that. So looking at the utilization of tiles, that home screen for the OEMs, and having discoverability and content and utilizing AI to be able to bring that up to the screen as well. So yeah, I think just seeing that grow, it's already been a fun little innovation and people are testing it. But how do we now scale that and make it meaningful for not just the OEMs or the brands, but also for the viewers?
Dan?
I wonder if AI can help answer the why part of it, so we can interrogate the vast swathes of data that comes out of that and go spot the patterns that maybe we as humans couldn't spot.
Kate, what innovations can we expect to see from your team next year?
Lots of things. I think what I will say is machines make better decisions than humans when you have more than 7 choices to make. So on that basis, I think I look to a future, it probably won't be next year, but I would really hope in the next few years where we can create some form of machine learning product, I'm not going to use the word AI, which will optimize for proper effectiveness, not for efficiency, but for long-term effectiveness, where we are delivering as much value to our advertisers as we possibly can. So that's our ambition.
Marvellous. Panel ends. Thank you. That's been fascinating.
Thank you.